For months, the world has been focused on US President Donald Trump and his efforts to end the Ukraine war. It's been a rollercoaster ride, with Trump bouncing between seemingly supporting Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on a whim. Trump's strategy seems to be working. How do we know? Trump just held a conversation with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan that has shown us one important thing: Turkey has had enough. Now Erdogan is ready to step in and end the war between Russia and Ukraine. The call happened on May 5th, with Trump and Erdogan linking up for several hours to discuss multiple issues. Chief among those issues was the Ukraine war, leading to Trump branding the call very good and productive once it ended. Invitations to visits were also extended on both sides, though no dates have been announced for any formal face-to-face meetings between the US president and his Turkish counterpart. On the Ukraine front, Trump confirmed that the call will lead to the US and Turkey working together to end the war. "I look forward to working with President Erdogan on getting the ridiculous but deadly war between Russia and Ukraine ended, now," Trump proclaimed in a Truth Social post moments after the call ended. Turkey was no less effusive about the outcome of the call. The country's Directorate of Communications posted a statement to X claiming that Erdogan supports all of the efforts Trump is making to end wars around the world. Noting that he supports President Trump's approach toward ending wars, President Erdogan expressed appreciation for the efforts exerted to maintain the negotiation process with Iran and stop the war between Russia and Ukraine, said the Directorate. Beyond that, we don't know a huge amount about the specifics the call covered. It certainly extended beyond Ukraine. Erdogan and Trump also spoke about the situation in Gaza, specifically how Erdogan wants to encourage a ceasefire between Israel and the Hamas militants, against which Israel is waging war. Erdogan also brought up the Syrian crisis following the fall of the country's president, telling Trump that he would do everything he could to maintain Turkey's commitments to the country as he encouraged the US to ease sanctions against Syria to help those efforts. But for Ukraine, the headline is simple: Trump and Erdogan appear ready to work together to bring an end to the war. The question now is simple: how? The answer to that question is a little more complicated than the question itself, especially as Turkey has seemed to play both sides in the Ukraine conflict since February 2022. As the Kyiv Independent noted in its report, Turkey has attempted to maintain both diplomatic and economic relationships with Russia and Ukraine since Putin began his invasion. On one hand, Turkey supports Ukraine's right to sovereignty and has leveraged its strategic position in the Black Sea to seemingly weaken Russia's presence in the waterway. On the other, Turkey continues to talk and trade with Russia. It's a complicated situation. However, this ability to balance relationships between both sides may make Turkey the perfect partner for Trump as he attempts to facilitate peace in Ukraine. To understand how, we need to dig deeper into Turkey's role in the Ukraine crisis, starting with the topsy-turvy relationship it maintains with Russia. A March 25th piece by the Hudson Institute says that Turkey has been playing on the chessboard of Middle Eastern and Eurasian power politics since the beginning of the invasion. That alone puts it in a good position to broker peace. Turkey's unique position as a country that has equal interests in the politics of both Europe and the Middle East allows it to understand complex geopolitics in ways that Ukraine's other allies don't. Turkey's relationship with Russia, both before and during the war, offers a perfect example. For several centuries, Turkish foreign policy has focused in large part on limiting Russian expansionism. This isn't done to preserve Europe. Turkey is acting out of self-interest. Turkey wants to maintain its influence to its east and south, with that influence being threatened by Russia's expansions into regions such as Syria. If we go back several centuries, we see that Turkey and Russia have long battled over their spheres of influence. The Russo-Turkish wars raged for nearly 400 years between the 16th and 20th centuries, demonstrating that the two countries are no strangers to conflict with one another. That power struggle has never disappeared, the Hudson Institute says, even after Turkey's NATO membership and the end of the Cold War placed it on ice. Fast forward to the last decade or so, and Turkey has switched from being an outright Russian adversary to playing more of a balancing act. That wouldn't have been apparent in November 2015. That's the month the Russian Su-24 fighter jet strayed into Turkish airspace. What was the Turkish response? It shot the jet down, making it clear to Putin that such violations wouldn't be tolerated. Interestingly, what seems like an incident that should have escalated tensions between Turkey and Russia instead triggered a deeper diplomatic relationship between the two. Months after shooting down the Su-24, Erdogan apologized for the incident to Putin. Turkey's leader likely wasn't actually sorry. The move, like so many that Turkey makes, was calculated to de-escalate tensions and benefit Turkey economically. Russia lifted sanctions placed against Turkey in response to the apology. That incident crystallizes the relationship between Turkey and Russia. Each side has made it clear that they'll respond to direct aggression. Still, there's an undercurrent of respect in place. An acknowledgement that Turkey and Russia can work together in many aspects, particularly economic, makes Turkey the perfect choice for playing a role in fostering negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. If you need proof, consider this. Turkey has attempted to play the role of mediator between the two warring nations in the past. Many people mistakenly think that all communication between Ukraine and Russia ended the moment that Putin ordered his troops to march into Ukraine in February 2022. That isn't the case. Just 4 days after the invasion, on February 28, 2022, delegates from Russia and Ukraine met in Belarus to discuss the conflict. Those talks proved fruitless in terms of ending Putin's supposed special military operation, but they did open the door to further talks in March of the same year. Where were those talks held? Turkey. Those talks almost brought an end to the war before it truly got underway. Erdogan opened those talks by proclaiming, "The world is waiting for good news, and good news from you." At the time, the move of talks from Belarus, which is a key Russian ally, to Turkey, seemed to showcase that Putin's position wasn't as strong as he'd initially believed. Turkey offered more of a middle ground country through which both Russia and Ukraine could make their points heard, and the talks ended in an agreement, almost. By March 20, 2022, outlets like Al Jazeera were reporting that Ukraine and Russia were close to an agreement. Turkey's foreign minister at the time, Mevlut Cavusoglu, even said, "Of course, it's not an easy thing to come to terms with while war is going on, while civilians are killed. But we would like to say that momentum is still gained. We see that the parties are close to an agreement." Close is an understatement. By the time talks ended in Turkey, Ukraine and Russia seemed to be on the road to an uneasy peace. An agreement was drafted. Turkey mediated discussions that led to Ukraine agreeing to abandon its plans to join NATO while placing limits on the country's military. In return, Ukraine would receive security guarantees from several Western countries and wouldn't be required to recognize Putin's illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014. Unfortunately, the agreement fell apart just before it could get over the last hurdle. Disagreements formed over the nature of the security guarantees being offered to Ukraine, with Putin clearly uncomfortable about what such guarantees might mean for his future ambitions for the country. Then Bucha happened. As negotiations were coming to an end, video footage emerged from the Ukrainian city of Bucha that seemed to show bodies lining the streets. Russia denied any involvement. It claimed to have withdrawn from the city and even suggested that the images may have been staged by Ukraine to paint it as the bad guy. Russia was lying. Satellite images of the city from March 19th showed bodies from the initial ground-level photos in the precise positions they were in when Ukraine discovered them. An earlier satellite image from March 11th, though less clear than the later image, also appeared to show the bodies in the same position. These pictures proved that Russia had engaged in the slaughter of Ukrainian civilians. Peace was now off the table. Turkey had come so close but ended up so far from a peace agreement thanks to the actions of Putin and the Russian military. The Ukraine war evolved into the attritional conflict that we see today, and now, 3 years later, what happened in Bucha seems to be little more than a microcosm of what's happening in Ukraine every single day. Still, Turkey has tried to cast itself as the mediator for peace talks in the years since the Bucha massacre. In July 2024, Turkey's current foreign minister, Hakan Fidan, made a new proposal suggesting that Turkey could help Russia and Ukraine form a peace platform that would spread the efforts to end the war over a wider basis. A peace platform that will prevent deepening polarization, has high participation and representation, and prioritizes diplomacy should be established, Fidan said at the time. He provided no further details related to what this peace platform might look like. However, it appears that Turkey was essentially trying to create a collective of nations that could work together to pressure Ukraine and Russia into coming back to the table. Nothing came of the plans. Still, they showed us that even after 2 years after Turkey's initial attempt to mediate peace, it was still trying to bring an end to the war. Fast forward to March 2025 and Turkey was at it again. On March 1st, Reuters reported that Fidan planned to reiterate Turkey's offer to host peace talks to European leaders in the wake of his February 24th visit with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, and an earlier visit to Turkey by President Zelensky. Fidan said the talks would be centered around delivering a fair and lasting peace, while noting that Turkey was prepared to take up the same role it took back in March 2022 to facilitate such talks. Now we have Erdogan talking with Trump about Turkey's role in peace plans. Perhaps Turkey's offer is about to turn into a reality. It may soon end up as the venue for direct discussions between Russia and Ukraine, this time potentially mediated by both itself and the United States. We don't know yet for sure. Still, history shows us that Turkey is more than capable of towing a fine line between Russia and Ukraine. The country maintains diplomatic relationships with both nations despite the conflict that rages between them. That alone, combined with its history of attempting to foster peace, could make Turkey a valuable ally to Trump as he attempts to end the conflict in Ukraine. That brings us to another question. Why might Turkey be so valuable? Beyond its past efforts to facilitate peace between Russia and Ukraine, Turkey could be a valuable voice in the peace discussions because it's acting as much out of its own interests as it is either Russia's or Ukraine's. The Foundation for Defense of Democracies made this point in a March article, in which it claimed that Turkey's attempts to create a balanced relationship with both Ukraine and Russia smacked of a certain level of self-interest. Turkey has long campaigned to become a member of the European Union or EU. Erdogan has previously suggested that identity politics has played a role in delaying Turkey's EU membership, claiming that the bloc is worried about accepting a Muslim-majority country into its ranks. That's not strictly accurate. Turkey began its EU candidacy in 1999, starting formal negotiations with the bloc 6 years later. Granted, that's 20 years ago. However, the EU has been wary of allowing Turkey into the fold due to concerns about Turkey no longer being a true democracy, along with conflicts the nation has with other EU members, including Cyprus and Greece. What does this have to do with peace in Ukraine? By casting itself as the main mediator in talks between the two warring nations, Turkey may be trying to pressure the EU into making concessions up to and potentially including accepting Turkey into the bloc. The EU would be hard-pressed to argue. If Turkey can help to negotiate a form of peace that's fair to Ukraine and Russia, it would establish itself as a diplomatic entity of great value to the EU. Combine that with Turkey having a chance to leverage growing European fears surrounding the diminished presence of US security guarantees in Europe, and Erdogan may have identified his country's route into an organization of which he's wanted to be a part for decades. Ukraine may provide Turkey's route into the EU. However, EU membership isn't the only aspect of self-interest that comes into play for Turkey. The country wants to work alongside Trump to end the Ukraine war because that conflict is affecting Turkey's interests in the Black Sea. For much of the Ukraine war, the Black Sea was believed to be one of Russia's keys to victory. It was home to Putin's Black Sea fleet. Stationed primarily in Crimea, that fleet was supposed to offer the dual purpose of shuttling Russian troops and equipment into Ukraine, while also bombarding the country from the water. It served that purpose, to a point. However, Ukraine proved far more resilient than Putin anticipated. By the combination of missile launches and the clever use of drone boats, Ukraine has managed to destroy a third of the Black Sea fleet, making it far less of an impactful force than many believed it would be. But where does Turkey fit into all of this? Well, the country has emerged as a Black Sea power broker of sorts since February 2022. Turkey controls the Bosporus and Dardanelles Straits, which provide the main routes into the Black Sea from outside waters. That control has proven vital to Ukraine's efforts against the Black Sea fleet. Thanks to Turkey, Russia hasn't been able to reinforce its fleet. Erdogan stopped that possibility. He has banned warships from sailing through the Turkish-owned straits, enabling Ukraine to whittle away at the Black Sea fleet without worrying about reinforcements arriving. Moving away from the Black Sea's military aspects, the waterway is also vital to Turkey from a trade perspective. The nation places a great deal of importance on the Black Sea, which it sees as crucial for trade connectivity, as well as being key to Turkey's energy industry ambitions. GIS says the sea has emerged as the venue for Turkey's domestic natural gas extraction industry, and has in the past also played a crucial role in the transportation of grain from Ukraine to Turkey. In fact, Erdogan met with Putin in September 2023 to revive a stalled Ukrainian grain deal that had collapsed months before due to Russia's claims that promises made to it weren't being fulfilled. All of this matters because it shows us that the Black Sea is vital to Turkey. The presence of the remnants of the Black Sea fleet in that waterway, combined with Ukraine using the Black Sea as a vector for its attacks on Crimea, places Turkish interests at risk. How can Erdogan exploit the Black Sea for trade when he's having to deal with the waterway being a war zone? He can't, which is one of the main reasons why he wants peace between Russia and Ukraine. For Turkey, that peace would be helpful to all three parties from the Black Sea perspective, with Turkey in particular also being able to leverage its position as the Black Sea power broker to improve its own geopolitical standing. So there's a clear vein of self-interest running through Turkey's efforts to foster peace in Ukraine. That also aligns Turkey with the US, which may be why the conversation between Trump and Erdogan went so well. Turkey has EU membership and Black Sea expansion on its mind. The US, on the other hand, is forming a minerals deal with Ukraine that will allow the US to profit from the vast resources of rare metals and other materials that lie under Ukraine's territory. Together, the US and Turkey could force Russia to the negotiating table, both to create peace and to ensure both nations prosper in the aftermath. All of this leaves us with a final question. What role is Turkey going to play in any future negotiations? We already know the answer when it comes to facilitating those negotiations. Turkey is willing to act as the impartial mediator, drawing from its relationships with Russia and Ukraine and its past role as a facilitator for conversations in the process. It's what comes after that, should Turkey and the US succeed in enabling peace, that's more interesting. GIS speculates that there are two roles Turkey could play in the aftermath of peace negotiations. The first is that the country takes on a direct role in enforcing any ceasefire that results. That scenario is possible if negotiations lead to military deployments by Western nations designed to keep the peace. However, it's unlikely Turkey would want to play that role, says GIS. Such a peace enforcement role would put it in direct conflict with Russia, which has said several times in the past that it won't allow Western troops to enter Ukraine for any reason. This approach would see Turkey place its eggs too deeply into the Ukrainian sovereignty basket, leading to Turkey angering Russia. Far more likely is a scenario where Turkey offers to lead and oversee any ceasefire that Ukraine and Russia manage to negotiate without the involvement of troops. That would be the far more desirable outcome for Turkey, according to GIS. It would get to maintain its relationships with Ukraine and Russia while showing the rest of the world, particularly the EU, how vital it is on the geopolitical scale. For Turkey, Erdogan's conversation with Trump may be the start of something big. Erdogan wants peace. He may even want it for many of the right reasons. However, he also sees Turkey's potential mediation role as a route toward leveraging the perception of his nation's importance to curry favor with the EU and the US. Turkey's leader has played a clever game over several years to put Turkey in this position. Now, we wait to see if he can play his hand to Turkey's advantage. But what do you think about the call between Trump and Erdogan? Does the positive response to the call by both the US and Turkey indicate that Russia and Ukraine may have taken a step closer to peace? Can Turkey really serve as the mediator between two nations that loathe each other so intensely? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more commentary on the latest developments in the Ukraine war. Now go and check out Turkey Goes Against NATO, Prepared to Send Troops to Ukraine, or click this other video instead.